Ladies and gentlemen of Earth, your world has been taken over, right in front of your faces, right underneath your noses. You were lied to, you believed it, and because the masses are largely herd-minded, unthinking animals that haven't stepped into using the faculties that their creator gave them of logic and deductive reasoning, thinking for themselves, independent thought, and critical thought, you've believed what has been told to you by the talking heads on the media, by your government. And because you have believed what has been forced down your throat, put in front of you, propagandizing you, beating you upon the head with the same narrative over and over and over again, you have effectively allowed your entire planet to be taken over. You have allowed the entire economic system of your planet to be eviscerated right in front of your faces. Ladies and gentlemen of Earth, you have been taken over in a communistic, Bolshevik-style takeover, and you don't even know it. There's many people out there that do, and they've been trying to tell you, and nobody wants to listen. Nobody wants to accept the truth. Because since 9/11, there's been an awful lot of us tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorists that have been pointing out all this stuff about what they're doing, about what government's doing, about the absolute fuckery of what government's doing to remove our rights, reduce our rights, and this applies to the entirety of the Western world. Think about Europe and Canada and Australia if you have been paying attention to the geopolitics and what has been being done by the governments of each of these respective Western world locations. Ladies and gentlemen of the world, your planet has been taken over right underneath your noses, right in front of your faces. Your lives have been fundamentally changed and altered, and you didn't even put up a fight. You just laid down, rolled over, and acquiesced like a good dog. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the world, you are ultimately going to suffer the consequences of your inactivity because you have no idea of the history of the mechanism that is moving upon the earth to take away your freedoms and to fundamentally change your lives. It is Bolshevism, it is communism, it is Zionism, it is Jewish, it is death. And since you didn't know it, and you didn't stop it, and it's gotten so far into your countries to the point that they've all been taken over to allow what we see unfolding now, the penalty that is going to be paid by all of us is going to be far more than any of us would have ever imagined. It's that bad, and the world still doesn't know it yet. And because you don't know your history, you don't have the knowledge that should put the fear of fucking God in you, that would actually be the motivating force that would likely get you off your ass to engage the world and to take the power out of the hands of these psychopathic motherfuckers. You don't know what Bolshevism is, and you don't know what happened when Bolshevism went through Russia, and you don't know that every time Bolshevism and communism get set up in a country, it starts to grind its population through the meat grinder. And it has killed, when you look at Russia, depending on the source, it has killed between 60 and 100 million people during that Bolshevik takeover. Look at what that country has been since those days. It was left in ruin, it was left in communism, it was left in socialism, it was left in despotism for years. Millions of Russians were purposefully starved, and the ones that weren't were brutalized, murdered, raped, beaten, and killed in the most horrific of fucking ways. It is almost unfathomable that this stuff actually takes place on planet Earth. Ladies and gentlemen of the world, because you don't know enough about the history of your own planet and the evil that moves upon the earth, you don't know about the Bolshevik takeover of Russia. You don't know about how the Bolsheviks took communism, which is a tool, an ideological tool, and it brought it into China. This is why China is full-on communistic. Ladies and gentlemen of the world, because you don't know that Mao killed between 60 and 90 million of his own Chinese people. You don't have the information, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have what it would take for you to understand the severity of the position that you are in the Western world. You don't have the anger, the fire, or the fear, the kind of fear that drives you to move, to take action against the people who have taken over your world right underneath your noses, right in front of your faces, because you don't know the details of what Mao did under the ideology of communism. And ladies and gentlemen of the world, your world has been taken over because you don't know what happened in the Eastern Bloc of Europe. You don't understand what happened to those Slavic countries and countries like Poland and what communism did in those countries once it got set up and got its grip, got its hooks into those cultures. You don't understand how it fundamentally changed in many respects the ideologies of all these countries, from Russia to China to Europe, Venezuela, Cuba, and the countries in China, or not China, Asia, the Asia-Pacific Rim, the Asian Rim, where communism is big. Ladies and gentlemen of the world, once these Zionist, communist, Marxist, Bolshevik people that have controlled the world, that have taken over the world, once they get fully what they want in place, they're going to begin to grind the rest of the Western world into paste in the same way it has always unfolded in Russia, in China, in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, in Cuba, in Venezuela, and every other country. That is what they're going to do. The Georgia Guidestones allude to wanting to reduce the world's population. And underneath the guise of a common fucking cold, and the fact that the world doesn't know enough about a cold, they've been driven into their homes in fear. They haven't sought the answers for themselves. They've been separated from each other, therefore they're not unified. And this evil that has been moving upon the earth, by way of moving its ideologies around, is now coming into the Western world countries. And now look at how disempowered all the Western world countries are. Europe, many of your countries have been disarmed. Australia, you guys have been disarmed. You have a fraction of the ability to fight back that Americans do. And sadly enough, even with Americans being as armed as they are, somehow Americans seem to be paralyzed. And it may likely be because they just don't know. The herd has been dumbed down because they've been get up, go to work, pay your bill, pay your taxes, raise your kids. That's a mode that has you focused on life in such a way that you don't have the time to pick your fucking head up and look around, pay attention, and see who the movers and shakers are. Because of the American dream, Americans gave up their fucking power to the government, trusting, for whatever reason that took place, that their government was going to behave themselves, not exceed their reach, not grotesquely inflate or take powers that didn't belong to them. Nope, Americans didn't see that. Western world didn't see that. As Zionism has slowly crept into each one of our respective countries and subverted the ever-loving shit out of all of our nations, perverted our cultures, perverted our countries, perverted our societies, divided us, and all of the things that it has done, and perverted all that is good in an effort to slowly, over time, rip our countries apart, rip our families apart, divide the individual, confuse the individual's mind, etc., etc., etc. Ladies and gentlemen of the world, this has all been taking place right underneath your noses. Ladies and gentlemen of the world, your planet is being taken over, and you don't even fucking know it. And when a human being is not critically thinking, and when a human being is not thinking for himself, he is much more like the animal. He is much more like a herd-minded being. Thusly, we see the world, who is largely unthinking for themselves, and they don't critically think, being driven exactly where your masters want you to be. And you've believed what they've told you, hook, line, and sinker. And even if you don't completely believe what they believe you, what they've been telling you, you still don't know enough about the reality of the world you live in to be able to completely understand and comprehend exactly what the hell is going on, because you haven't taken the time to take in the information that would give you a foundational understanding of the reality of the world you fucking live in, who's been moving in it, what their ideologies are, and what they've been aspiring to do since, well, we'll say since at least September 11th of 1990, when Daddy Bush told everybody in the world the New World Order's coming. And here's your bigger problem, ladies and gentlemen of the world. You've let your last generation be completely mind-fucked to the point of utter impotence. And that generation represents the youth, the men, the people from age 18 to about 35. And when you see a 34-year-old man with a game joystick in his hand, who's more interested in playing games and smoking weed than he is getting up off his ass, you see that all over the Western world. 30-somethings, these millennial people, most of them are inactive. Most of them are more interested in many other trivial things that are at the level of life that are still childlike, teenage-like, and lacking maturation. Ladies and gentlemen of the world, because you've allowed your last generation to be attacked so profoundly, they've been rendered impotent. And that generation represents the very fighting age males that it would likely take to mount any type of a significant resistance across the world. So that leaves you with what's left of the generation before to do any fighting, to do anything if anything's going to be done. Ladies and gentlemen of the world, you are fucked and you didn't even know it. And when you recognize how the ripple effect is going to affect you as it comes, economically, socially, the social distance, the social engineering, when you recognize that all the politicians have gone rogue, when you recognize all the politicians are working for the New World Order, when you finally recognize that, it's going to be too goddamn late. It actually already is. Ladies and gentlemen of the world, your planet has been taken. the fuck over. And you still haven't figured it out yet. And through whatever tactics they decide to use, whatever strategy or mechanism of death, as Zbigniew Brzezinski is quoted as saying, it's far easier, infinitesimally easier, to kill 1 million than to control 1 million. So as they begin to unroll their plans, ladies and gentlemen of the world, and they start killing large groups of people through means and ways that are so illusory, meaning you don't see their fingerprints, you don't know it's them. Oh, a virus could do that, even though this virus has been a complete and total fucking lie. They've been looking at the population. They've been looking what kind of resistance they would get. They've been looking. Meanwhile, deceiving and lying, setting everything up, changing and conditioning minds, and setting up pieces of the infrastructure that the Bolsheviks, the communists, the Marxists, the socialists would want. They have wiped out the middle class. They've wiped out small to medium businesses. And look at what it's done to hospitals. And when you realize that hospitals are for-profit businesses, that if they start to go under, what do you think that's going to do for any of our respective societies? So it's entirely possible that these Western world nations could begin to nationalize and socialize those hospitals, and oh, there it begins. There it starts. And the Western world goes away from anything that resembled having rights, having freedoms, having anything that a free human being would want, to becoming more like herd animals in a communistic society where the psychopath rules the motherfucking world. And the sheep are led to the fucking slaughter, and until then, everything they produce is taken from them. That's what happens to the fucking herd.